Okay, so in this introductory video, let's talk about basic economic concepts and specifically competition, demand and supply, welfare analysis, and elasticity. So let's begin by talking a little bit about economics and competition. So what is economics? When it comes to the definition of economics, we typically rely on Lionel Robbins' definition. Lionel Robbins was a professor who taught at the London School of Economics, and he was an economic historian and very influential in many ways. And he defined economics as the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. I still remember when I was a student, my professor back then said economics is the science of allocating scarce resources efficiently, and scarcity involves the fact that the use of something has alternative applications and one needs to make decisions. So that's why another common definition is that economics is the science of efficiently allocating scarce resources. And the basic idea of economics is, therefore, that because resources are scarce and ones are unlimited, we need to make decisions that involve trade-offs. And how do we best handle this trade-off situation? And that has been a discussion which basically gave rise to what is known as comparative economics. So socialist economies try to answer that question, and market-based economies or competitive economies also addressed this question. And in the competition of different economic ideas, I think it is obvious that generally the market-based perspective on how to best handle this trade-off situation between unlimited wants and scarce resources is best handled by a competitive economy, which is based on economic freedom by the individual producers and consumers, but of course also other things like democracy and rule of law and other institutions. But let's talk next a little bit more about economics and its main distinction. So in economics we distinguish between micro and macroeconomics. And microeconomics studies individual decision making, like the behavior of households or firms, but could be also an individual market like the market for bicycles. And microeconomics is moreover concerned with the interaction of households and firms in different market structures. And some important market structures are perfect competition. That is actually the most important because it is also some kind of a light build that is being used by economic policy that many economies aspire to accomplish. And then there's a monopoly and there's monopolistic competition. So in perfect competition, you have so many producers and consumers that no individual economic actor has any market power. In a monopoly, you have only one producer that faces many consumers, and that producer has lots of market power. And the idea of monopolistic competition is probably the most realistic in the sense that today we are surrounded largely by monopolistically competitive markets. And monopolistic competition means that we have competition, but individual firms still have some degree of market power and or power over consumers, and it often is driven by marketing endeavors and creating brand loyalty and product differentiation in particular, so that people think that, you know, car A has a different image than car B, even though they are basically technically more or less the same. So those are important market structures that microeconomists study. And then in macroeconomics studies the economy in its entirety by aggregating all individual economic actors into units like aggregate demand or aggregate supply. Those are very important macroeconomic concepts. And in macroeconomics, we study phenomena that are of relevance to the economy in its entirety. And those are concepts like unemployment, inflation, business cycles, national debt, balance of payments, or exchange rates. Okay, but let's first talk about what a market is and what competition is. And a market is simply a location where sellers and buyers meet in order to engage in voluntary exchange of goods and services. So that's quite important, voluntary exchange. So nobody is forced to do anything. Coerced trade, that would be against our liberal, humanistic perspective. And a perfectly competitive market is one in which no economic actor has market power in the sense to prevent third parties from engaging in mutually beneficial voluntary trades. And that is often confused. When economists speak of perfect competition, they really mean a market in which no one has market power. But for outsiders of economics, perfect competition is often associated with some kind of Darwinian survival of the fittest concept, which is characterized by a very ruthless competition among economic actors, at whose end there will be only one survivor. Well, that perspective is not perfect competition. Again, in perfect competition, no one has any market power. And that phenomenon or that assumption or that characteristic creates many wonderful welfare implications. And that assumptions and those characteristics ultimately make sure that the scarcity problem within society is solved, at least theoretically, to the best available outcome. And another important concept is market clearance. So in a competitive markets, we say that markets will always clear. And what we mean by that is that a market is set to clear when there is no buyer and seller left that still could engage in a mutually beneficial transaction. Okay, so that was just some preliminary overview of what economics and competition is. And beginning with the next video, we'll start working on various concepts. We start by demand and quantity demanded before we go into other things like welfare analysis and elasticity. Okay, so let's stop here and let's continue with demand and quantity demanded in the next video.